Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Success Insight podcast. Today's episode is another addition to our outdoor adventure series, and our guest today is Travis Puglisi. He's the founder of Wandering Mojave Hiking Services. Now, we first met Travis back in February when he recorded his first podcast episode with us, and this is where he introduced us to the Wandering Mojave Hiking Services. We're going to provide you a link in our show notes back to that episode, which was way back in February. And you'll recall that Travis is a 20-year desert resident and offers guided hiking and backpacking experiences in Joshua Tree National Park. Now that summer is in full swing, we're excited to bring Travis back so we can discuss how to prepare for your outdoor desert adventure and to stay safe. So Travis, welcome back to the Success Insight podcast and the Outdoor Adventure Series.
Thanks, Howard. I appreciate you having me back.
Fantastic. And for our listeners, in the spirit of full disclosure, I had the good fortune to travel out to Joshua Tree a couple of weeks back, and Travis was gracious enough to take me on we'll call it a half a day hike. I was just very happy to survive, but this was probably a walk in the park for Travis. But what a wonderful experience to be taken around and really to enjoy not only the surroundings, but to be educated along the way. And so, Travis, I really want to thank you for that experience.
It's my pleasure, Howard. Since we initially connected on Facebook, I feel like you and I have connected not just on the social platforms, but in the real world. And, I feel like we're friends and I really appreciate your time, with me in Joshua Tree and through the process of these interviews we've done together.
Very good. And ditto from my side as well. It's been a great experience. And I think it's wonderful to be able to give you a shout and just say, hey, I've got an idea. Would you mind coming back onto the podcast? And really, I think the timing of this is perfect because we are in summertime. It's full swing. Memorial Day was a couple weeks ago. And as you took me out to the Joshua Tree, we went on the hike. I really began to think about not only my safety, and I knew as a licensed or certified guide out in Joshua Tree, I mean, you can't just suddenly put a shingle on your door and say, hey, I do excursions out into Joshua Tree or any other national park for that matter. But it got me thinking about how does one prepare for this? And what are some of the things not only you do in your preparations to keep folks safe, but what are some of the things that you would advise your future guest or even somebody who's going to take his or her family out to Joshua Tree just for a half a day, a full day, and things that they may not be aware of and really needed to be prepared for?
I think whether you're a client of Wandering Mojave Hiking Services, or you are simply doing your own, trips into Joshua Tree National Park, I think there's kind of some bottom line information that, everyone visiting the park needs to be aware of. Principally, there are no services inside the park. There's no water to be had. There's no spigots anywhere. There's no gas stations inside the park. There's no food providers inside the park. And so really, once you cross that park boundary through, any of the multiple entrances that lead you inside Joshua Tree National Park, what you have with you in your vehicle is all that you have. So I think that the number one thing that anyone can do is to make sure that they're driving in with an adequate amount of fuel in their tanks, that they have an adequate amount of food to provide themselves with the nourishment they need, and an more than adequate amount of water. You never know. Accidents are accidents because you don't anticipate them necessarily when they happen. Maybe that's some part of your vehicle having a failure. And if you have a vehicle failure, in Joshua Tree National Park at this time of year, one minute you could be driving through in the absolute comfort of air conditioning and having everything you need to, being stuck on the side of the road at 110 degrees and no shade in sight. So, taking care of yourself and making sure you have everything you need in your vehicle is really the first step. then that's not even accounting for your hiking experience or your rock climbing experience, which is another layer of preparation.
When I went into the park, now the first time I went in, you were gracious enough to pick me up. I went with you. And the next time, before I actually entered, I went and filled up with gas. I have a huge container of water that I take with me when I do these kinds of adventures. But I'm curious, with let's just say a family of four, how much water do they need to bring?
We're going to separate an actual like a hiking excursion from a driving tour, for instance. And if you are simply driving into the park and seeing the sights, maybe doing a very little bit of light trail travel or simply stepping out of your vehicle to take a photograph here and there, you should be traveling with 1 gallon of water per person. And I think it's safe to say that it doesn't matter what time of year you're traveling through the park. If you're coming from a place like Florida or Texas or the East Coast where humidity levels are much, much higher, you're going to be experiencing the aridity of the desert, which is constantly whisking away your moisture, not only through the process of perspiration, which is what our body does to stay cool, but also by convection, because the wind is whisking away that water from your body. So no matter what time of year, 1 gallon per person.
Okay. It was interesting when I was out there with you, the weather was really nice. I mean, and it was not too hot. I think we were probably in the upper 80s. There was a little bit of a breeze. But even with weather like that, I have to be prepared for, as you said, the aridity of my moisture from my body is just being whisked away.
Yeah. And I think it's something that can be very deceptive for people is, in the desert, you seldom feel yourself sweat. And again, sweating is what cools our bodies down. It's that process of evaporation that makes us feel cool. But if you never feel wet, how do you know you're sweating? And some people use that as a main indicator for when they need to drink water. Oh, I'm sweating. I'm very wet. I need to, hydrate. But in the desert, that evaporation happens so quickly that the moisture seldom accumulates on your body. And so, whether you feel that moisture gathering in your clothes or on your backpack or not, you just have to keep drinking.
Now, in terms of clothing, I mean, we go out for a nice, couple hour excursion over to, the Colorado River. Okay. I'm going to wear my shorts. Maybe I have some sandals. I've got some suntan lotion and a hat. What different kinds of clothing would I need if I'm going out into a desert environment? And specifically, one of the last places I visited in Joshua Tree before heading back home was this area. I forget the kind of cactus it is. I know it's extremely painful if you touch it. Cocotel or
that would be cholla.
Cholla, there you go.
Cholla, and that's spelled CHOLLA. So it has a Spanish pronunciation of the double L. But yeah, cholla is our most infamous cactus of all, and we have several different species of it. But the reason it is infamous is because it is double barbed or reverse barbed. So going in, anytime you're poked with something sharp, it hurts when it goes into your body. But cholla is actually much more painful to pull out of your body because of those reverse barbs. And I would say that, again, just like, it doesn't matter what time of year, you should always have a gallon of water, per person per day. When it comes to, hiking and whether you're on a trail or doing cross-country hiking, I always wear long pants and I always wear long sleeves. It doesn't matter if it's the peak of summer or the dead of winter. And the reason is because the desert flora and the desert geology is a fairly aggressive place with cactus, with spiny yuccas, with rough rocks. And it's the wearing of those long pants. It's going to create a protective membrane between your skin, which is your largest organ, and the very massive exterior world of the desert. I would also add that, the sun feeds everything in this world. It's what makes us all keep going. But it is also this energy source that is full of radiation, and creating a boundary that does not require reapplication like sunblock on your body through long pants and long sleeves, I think is just about the smartest thing and most relevant tip I could give anyone when it comes to hiking in the desert.
As I began to do my research last summer when I first got to Las Vegas, and really in preparation to coming out to visit Joshua Tree, I knew I was going to wear long pants. I knew I was going to wear my long sleeve shirt, which, by the way, had the hood. Because even though I had a nice wide brim hat, there's still, for somebody like me who's, has from Northern European descent, very fair skin. And there's for the folks that, if you were seeing me on this podcast, there's not a lot upstairs anymore. So, I definitely was cognizant of I needed to protect my skin. And so that I only really needed the suntan lotion on my face and et cetera. So we've got water, we've got clothing. What kind of food do you typically bring? Or even if it's a short, we went out for about 2 or 3 hours, which again, for me, that was perfect. But what kind of food do you bring onto the hike? And should I be eating before the hike, or do I wait till I, have a cup of, should I even be drinking coffee? I think I kind of joke with my friends. I'm a big coffee fanatic. I love my coffee in the morning. I had coffee before the hike. Should I even be drinking coffee? Because I know coffee is a dehydrator. How do I prepare food-wise for like an adventure you took me on?
Well, in theory and in practice, it doesn't matter if you plan on spending, 24 hours or 4 hours on the trail or in the backcountry. There's this baseline thing that you always want to have in your pack, again, because this is, accidents are things that we don't anticipate. And since we don't anticipate when they're going to happen, we always want to expect that they will happen. I always go out with one thing you have is your 10 essentials. And this isn't specific to food, but I think for me, I include food in the 10 essentials, and everyone kind of has a different idea of what the 10 essentials are. Okay. For me, the 10 essentials are, a headlamp plus a spare set of batteries, a knife, a lighter, electrolytes, in a form that are, shelf stable, like dissolvable tablets or salt tablets work for that. A pencil. I always have duct tape or Gaffers tape with me. I always have, for me, one of my most important 10 essentials is my satellite messenger, which allows me to communicate in places where I don't have cell phone service, which is 99.9999% of Joshua Tree National Park. Then I would say my last, item or two on my 10 essentials is always just an extra bar or an extra can of tuna. Now, if we go back specifically to food, I think it's really important to do the things that make you feel whole and together. If you are one of those people that has coffee every day, and if you don't drink coffee on a day and that leads to a caffeine-related headache, I would rather you start off the day with your coffee and having no headache than starting a hike with a headache. Because once you start exerting yourself, things like that tend to be exacerbated. I believe that starting your outing in the park or any outdoor environment with a surplus of calories is super important. Even people that say, "Oh, I don't really eat breakfast," I would definitely encourage them to at least have some toast, maybe with some peanut butter on it or something like that. And then when it comes to the trail food, everyone's got their their own, idea of what makes a great meal. For me personally, my most favorite thing to have on a trail is sardines that are soaked in tons of olive oil, spiked with some lemon juice and maybe some celery salt, and big slices of bread. I always have a huge bag of mixed nuts. I make my own trail mix. Nuts aren't cheap, so we shouldn't be paying anyone extra special markup just to mix nuts for us. So that's something that can easily be done. And then sugar. We can't rely on sugar, but sugar is one of those things that in a pinch, especially if we're tired, if we're lost, if we're confused, sugar can go a long way in giving us even just a brief moment of clarity to start collecting ourselves again. And then, of course, water is really important and the most important thing when you're hiking in the desert. I tend to not go out with anything less than 3 liters, regardless of where I'm going. And to a lot of people, that sounds very excessive. But for me, I never want to have an opportunity cut out. So if I see a ridge line or the face of a cliff and I want to go there, I never want to be declined that opportunity because I don't feel like I have enough water. So the more sustenance and hydration you bring with you, the greater your opportunities to explore.
Fantastic. And I wholeheartedly agree on the 3 liters of water. I have my hydration pack, which is maybe the pack itself is a little on the smaller side, could be a little bigger, but man, those 3 gallons of water, I know from when you and I went out, I probably drank a good 2 of those.
Yeah.
And it was definitely enjoyable throughout the hikes. So definitely that.
You raised the point of pack size. I think pack size is a very important component anytime you intend to be away from your vehicle for, more than a few hours. And what that really amounts to is, how prepared you are amounts to how much space you have to bring things with you. And so, you have a lunch to pack and snacks to pack. In a perfect world, you're packing a first aid kit and you're also packing layers. So maybe it's windy, maybe it's cold, maybe it could get windy or it could get cold. Maybe you could encounter water and your socks could get wet. All of these things that you want backing you up take up space. And so every backpack is typically rated by liters. How many liters of material can it contain? I think an excellent day pack is somewhere between 18 and 24 liters. If you're getting something that is less than 18 liters, it's going to get harder for you to carry anything much beyond, your water and some food and snacks. You won't be able to necessarily get those layers in as well. So, I think a 24-liter day pack is a really great way to go for a beginner that is looking to have everything that they need on their person to have the most thorough adventure they're looking for.
I remember when we were taking one of our first breaks and you and I sat down, we pulled out our food, and you said something to me that I'll never forget is because I can't remember. I was searching for something. I had my pack. I had an over-the-shoulder camera case, which fits kind of nicely in front of me. And we had packed my hiking sticks, which I want to talk about that too. But you had said, I was looking for something and you gave me a piece of advice. You said, Howard, take everything off that you're carrying before you go searching for it. Do you recall saying that to me?
I do. And that's actually, I would say, a very frequent situation. So particularly with photographers, because if I remember correctly, you had your day pack, you had your camera, and you had a camera case, and they were all kind of suspended from your body. And we had come to a place where we were going to break for a little while. I think we were specifically looking at some granite granitic formations to talk about geology a little bit. And there was also a spot of shade there. And I think you were starting to look for a snack is what it was. And you took I believe you had your backpack off, but you still had these two other things hanging from your body. And you were and cameras are valuable and lenses are valuable. And so whether consciously or not, you were exerting quite a bit of effort to make sure that your camera remains safe and well balanced on your body, while you're also digging into your bag to find snacks and then also balancing the camera case. And you were effectively trying to do three things at once. And every time I stop, I try and take everything off of my body. And I'm doing that so that I can feel relief. Whether you're on a 4-hour hike or a 12-hour hike, carrying that weight accumulates in our bodies, and it adds a tension that we don't have in our day to day when we're walking around, unencumbered. And by removing all of those things, you're free to look around you. You're free to take a deeper breath because you're not constricted by your shoulder, straps or your waist straps. And you're also free to, find that thing that may be at the very bottom of your pack. So, taking breaks is supremely important. But when you're taking those breaks, what's even more important is that it's a legitimate break and you're giving yourself the space and freedom of movement to do the things you need to do, like drink water, have a snack, take in the scenery, have a nice big unencumbered breath. And I think, some people just forget that in the wilderness, we have time. Like we've specifically set time aside to engage with the wilderness, which even though it's physical exertion, it's also eliminating all that psychic plaque that we build up, in the rat race of every day. So yeah, I do recall that very specifically.
And there was also a second instance, our second major stop, because we were in the shade, and there was definitely some larger trees in the area.
Mm-hmm.
What is the pine tree that is in Joshua Tree?
The pinyon pine.
Pinyon pine. We were near some pinyon pines. There was a nice breeze. Shade. We had the shade. And I remember you and I were like sitting down against the rocks, and first of all, that was that little stop right there was my favorite stop, because I literally could have taken a nap. I mean, it was such a wonderful place to stop, this breeze, and it's like, this is great. And so that by itself was definitely very memorable. You also pulled out a kind of a 3-panel type of mat or something like that. What was that, by the way?
So that is I'll do a little product plug here. That's a product produced by Thermarest, which is probably the most notable producer of sleeping pads in the outdoor industry. They've been at it for a long time. That was something called a Z-Lite, and a Z-Lite is a foam pad that is in foldable panels. And specifically, that one was cut from a larger sleeping pad, which the smaller portion you don't really need necessarily if you're out sleeping in the wilderness, because what you really need covered is your butt and your core and hopefully your head. But your feet and stuff like that don't necessarily need that same padding. And so I cut that down, and I carry those 3 foldable panels as kind of a multi-tool. I use that for sitting on if there's something about the surface that I don't want to get into my body or my clothes, like cactus spines and such. Or sometimes I spread food out on it. But the reason I actually really carry that is not as a sleeping pad, is not as a surface to sit on or spread food out on. I really carry that because it is an ideal material for bracing a leg. should someone fall and experience a break or anything that requires a stabilization of their leg. That's not something that I ever carried previous to taking my course with Knowles as a wilderness first responder. But after that class, I never went anywhere without it because it's so light and so multi-purpose. And I know that if anything, more severe should happen, that I'm really prepared to stabilize a leg or an arm should there be a break.
No, I love it. I think I appreciated it, especially you offered it to me, Howard, sit on this, and it was like perfect. And I didn't take the nap, but I could have done it. I could have
too. I remember that. And that's the beauty of, full day hikes or overnight hikes is you want to take that nap,
That was wonderful. Now, another question is actually, let me tell you one lesson. Okay, let me do let's talk the hiking sticks. And I definitely had a lesson learned about quality of clothing because you saw me experience it towards the end of our hike. But let's talk about the hiking sticks because I have found that I really need to be using my hiking sticks. And because I think when we started, I wasn't using those. And then, I was carrying them. And then eventually we found a way to kind of, store them on the outside of my pack. But it seems to me that we should all be having a pair of hiking sticks with us when we go out, even if it's a short 30-minute hike, 15-minute hike, because you just never know.
Yeah. Trekking poles are something that I would say in the larger picture of my experience as both an individual and a professional, I discovered trekking poles rather late. I'm going to be 40 in 3 months. And like a lot of my fellow 40-year-old males and females for that matter, around this age, you're starting to encounter, some of the pains and creaks that are from, our previous lives of young people, living hard and fast, in knees and backs and necks. These are the things that start to really pop up, when we're, approaching our 40s. And the thing is, and I tell this to people all the time, like, and I don't want it to sound like I'm being overly complimentary of myself, but I'm a badass. Like I go out into the wilderness and I can hike hard and fast in extreme conditions over unbelievable terrain. And using trekking poles makes me more of a badass because I can go farther, faster, harder, safer with those than I could without. And trekking poles are not for old people. Trekking poles are not for people with mobility issues. Trekking poles are for everyone. They just add this component of comfort on the body and the elimination of stress that allows us to do more. So they're not a sign of weakness. They're not a sign of old age. They're a sign of intelligence. And I would encourage people that are younger that might be listening to this podcast to really check them out. Maybe go down to your local outfitter and rent a pair and give them a shot. They do take some getting used to, but once you've incorporated them as a tool into your movement, either on trails or in the backcountry, man, I don't see how anyone could ever go back to not using them.
I agree. I mean, they've been a great asset to me. One thing I also found was these poles actually would have been very useful as we're climbing up towards this mine, this abandoned shaft, and it was actually pretty cool. But I haven't been climbing over rocks, for many years, and I definitely found the poles would have been a much greater benefit for me. And I think it wasn't even until we started making our way back that I eventually took out those poles.
I find that's a fairly common occurrence. A lot of people have trekking poles because they think they're supposed to have them, but don't necessarily know why they have them. Or alternately, I think some people think that they have them for a certain terrain, and it's not until they reach that terrain that they get them out, if they even remember to. And that may have, I think, been a little bit of what you were experiencing. I think the short of the long is, try not to bring things along that you either don't know how to use or don't intend on using. And, trekking poles, typically I will have them out from the very beginning of a hike. Not always, but most of the time. And then I don't necessarily put them up until I reach terrain where I cannot use them, which generally involves, some kind of, class 3 or higher terrain, which, doesn't allow me to use the poles or makes them a hindrance versus an aid. And what poles are really doing, they're giving you multiple points of contact. And so what I tell people as often as possible is don't balance, and they think, what? Like, don't balance? I'm supposed to balance. But really what I'm saying is don't work harder than you need to work. If you think about a table always has at least 3 legs and often 4 legs. And a 4-legged table is very stable. A 3-legged table is also very stable. But no one makes legs or tables with 2 legs because they would just fall over. And so, that's, if we imagine ourselves as a stable unit, having a third available point of contact with the terrain in front of us or below us, or even a third and fourth, goes a long way in allowing us to use the minimum amount of effort, which helps us reserve energy. It helps us reserve, the water that our body needs. It helps us reserve bandwidth of our brains to maintain situational awareness, whether that's to keep your eyes on the terrain or to keep your eyes out for risks such as rattlesnakes, or to keep your eyes open for, that ideal, photograph that you came out looking for as a photographer. So anything that you can do to free up your space in your mind and your body to have more access to your experience, I think is a plus.
Perfect. No, I definitely appreciate that point of view. One last question with regard to going out into environments like the desert, so Joshua Tree, Mojave, Death Valley. Pets. Should we be bringing our pets with us?
A lot of times we don't have to make the decision for ourselves because someone else has already made the decision. So, for instance, if you're coming to Joshua Tree National Park, Joshua Tree National Park has said your dog, or I assume that would mean cat or any pet that you might travel with, is fine to be with you in the campground. It always needs to be on a leash, and it's not allowed on any trails. So Joshua Tree National Park has already made that decision for us about when it's appropriate and where it's not appropriate to have our pets. It doesn't mean that you can't bring a pet into Joshua Tree National Park, because there are miles and miles and miles of excellent dirt roads with beautiful vistas where it's totally legal for you to have your pet. But if all you can do is have your pet with you on a dirt road or with you at a campground, that's kind of limiting what you are able to do outside of those conditions. So, are you comfortable leaving your pet in your vehicle or tied up at your campground while you go and do a family hike? What if the temperatures are anywhere over 60 degrees? Is it okay for you to leave your pet in your car? And I think, anything over 70 degrees, if you're in a vehicle, it can start to get hot. So, I think if you're a responsible pet owner, I think the best thing for you to do is either leave your pet at home with a pet sitter, or to use a local service that watches pets while you're having your experience inside Joshua Tree National Park. Now, I don't know the names of any of them. I know that there are at least a couple places in the high desert that will watch your pet for you while you're out exploring.
Sure.
And I really think that is the optimal situation for pet owners. Otherwise, they're experiencing stress. The pets are experiencing stress. And the presence of domesticated animals also introduce stressors on the local environment. And typically that's by way of their waste products or their food. When a dog poops in off a trail or something like that, the likelihood of a coyote encountering that is pretty high. And because, coyotes and domesticated dogs are both in the same, taxonomic family, it means that diseases that neither one of them might be accustomed to are easily transferred back and forth through their waste products. So my advice is leave your pets at home or get a pet sitting service so that everyone can, have their most fulfilling experience.
Very good. Thank you also for that point of view as well. Travis, so what's going to be on the horizon for Wandering Mojave? I mean, you've probably got some, your days of the week that you've allotted to, take visitors out into the park are probably set. But, what's going to be new for you and Wandering Mojave coming up?
Well, I think the newest thing for me really is, Wandering Mojave coming into its first, period of the hot months. Last year we had COVID, so visitation was largely down. But, with some COVID stuff kind of being alleviated, people are traveling more. And so I've kind of had to figure out how I deal with the hot months, which ultimately ends up meaning, all hikes, whether they're half-day hikes or full-day hikes, are starting at sunrise. And then there's also an, alternative for half-day hikes starting, a few hours before sunset. So kind of getting adjusted to the rhythm of business during the hotter months of the Mojave has been, important thing for me. And then I think the thing that I'm most excited about right now is starting to act as a hike leader for the Desert Institute. And the Desert Institute is the educational arm of the Joshua Tree National Park Association. And they've been leading desert study related courses in and around Joshua Tree National Park for a long time now. And I'm really honored to be associated with them and affiliated, and now have the title of instructor because it means that I've kind of not stumbled upon, but found myself in a position of accomplishing one of my goals, which is making sure that Wandering Mojave is engaging not just in these recreational outings, but explicitly educational experiences. And I mean, whether it's explicit or not, all of the Wandering Mojave experiences are inherently educational, but to be guiding people that have a specific interest in desert studies, maybe a slightly more advanced understanding of desert geology or desert biology, allows me to tap deeper into my store of information and learnings that I've accrued over the years. And that's very exciting for me. And I couldn't be happier with that. And so I've designed 5 hikes for them for their fall catalog, which I think is going to be issued in the next week or two. Anyone that's interested in checking that out, please check out joshuatree.org, and that will take you to the JTMPA, Joshua Tree National Park Association website. And from there, you'll be able to find the Desert Institute. And I think the registration for those fall courses is going to be happening before the end of this month.
That is fantastic. And it definitely builds upon, your brand, and it also, further, instantiates your niche as a, go-to resource in Joshua Tree as not only a guide, but also as an educator as well. So that is fantastic news for you.
Yeah, thanks, Howard. I do appreciate that.
So, and we will most definitely provide whatever backlinks we need, in our show notes. We're going to get this episode up pretty quickly, so even if we've got to go back and update the show notes with the links, make sure we get to the catalog within the Desert Institute, Joshua Tree National Park Association. Travis, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where are the best places for them to go?
The first stop would be wanderingmojave.com. My website's pretty thorough, and it is updated for the hot months, meaning, what our start times are, what the conditions can be like in the desert summer period. And then, they can also find my blog, which is called Wandering Words there, which will give people a little bit of insight into, what my eyes are paying attention to and what kind of learning I'm pursuing at any given moment. And then I'm also on Instagram at Wandering Mojave and Facebook as well. And I really use those platforms as a way to, engage with people that are interested in, the sciences and flora and fauna of the Mojave Desert, as well as, anyone just looking, for tips on how to conduct themselves in the wilderness in this rather harsh environment.
That is fantastic, and we'll most definitely provide all the backlinks, especially to Wandering Mojave and to your social sites on Facebook, Instagram, and on your blog. Travis, it is a pleasure once again to have you join us here on Success Insight, and specifically for our outdoor adventure series. And as we shared early on, you are my friend. We have broken paths together, haven't necessarily broken bread, but I look forward to continuing this relationship with you and learning more about what you're going to be doing with the Desert Institute, and as your business continues to expand. I think continuing to have you as a guest on our podcast is a great way to expand our brand for the Outdoor Adventure Series. So thank you for joining us once again.
Yeah, my pleasure, Howard. And if it's okay, I want to say one more thing.
Sure.
And I think this is the most important thing that anyone can do. It doesn't matter if you're an experienced hiker or a beginner hiker or a climber or backpacker or any of those things. The best thing that you can do for yourself or your party is to let somebody who knows you and cares about you know where you are going and when you expect to be back. Because whether you've prepared for being on the trail or any of the eventualities or not, if there's someone that's got your back outside of the wilderness that knows when you're going to be back, you're going to be in a better position to be rescued should anything unforeseeable happen. So please tell people where you're going and when you expect to be back.
Very wise advice, and definitely we'll include that in the notes as well. And obviously, people are going to be listening to it, so take those words to heart that Travis has just shared. And again, Travis, thank you again, and we look forward to future episodes with you on Success Insight and the Outdoor Adventure Series.
Sounds great, Howard. Thanks for having me back. I really do appreciate it.
Fantastic. All right, folks, we have just been chatting with Travis Puglisi. He is the founder of Wandering Mojave Hiking Services. And as we're also going to, acknowledge him as a guide and educator for the Desert Institute, which is Joshua Tree National Park Association. It's their, educational body. And so now he's going to add that to his resume. But really, today's episode was designed to really, leverage, Travis's experience and knowledge, and just being, that 20 plus year desert resident. And, he's so experienced of going out to Joshua Tree and wandering around Mojave. And, for folks like him, I think his essentials that he shared with us, the headlamps, the knives, the lighter, the electrolytes. We talked about, pencil, duct tape, a satellite messenger, food, and anything that is, and especially water. But the things that are designed to keep you safe when you decide you want to go out on an adventure like this, especially when it's going out into a very beautiful but yet unforgiving environment, which is the desert. And out here in the Southwest, we have Joshua Tree, we've got Mojave National Preserve, we've got Death Valley, Valley of Fire. Any of these places, you've got to be prepared. And really, we have to take to heart Travis's last piece of insight, which is let people know where you're going. And if you make changes, let people know that. Don't have people guess where you are, okay? That is first and foremost. Probably along with the water as well, having a vehicle that's in good working order. But there's so many wonderful places out here in the Southwest to explore, and it's folks like Travis and his work that makes this so much fun. And especially in the last year that we had in 2020. And then again in 2021, as we're midway, through the year. And we're beginning to get out and explore again. And so what better way than to visit someplace beautiful like Joshua Tree National Park. Folks, let us know what you thought of today's episode. We really appreciate it. You can find us on successinsightpodcast.com. We're on Facebook and on LinkedIn, our Success Insight Podcast pages. You can leave a comment in any of these places, venues for our episodes. We're also on all of the major podcasting platforms, iHeartRadio, Google Podcast, Apple Podcasts, Pandora, and especially Spotify, where we have the Outdoor Adventure Series playlist. So this episode, in fact, the first episode we did with Travis way back in the beginning of the year, is out there along with some other great episodes for folks who are so passionate about outdoor adventures. All right, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. Take care of yourselves, your family, be safe, have fun, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Success Insight Podcast. Take care now.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.